Time is supposed to move forward, second by second, moment by moment. But what if it doesn't? What if, somewhere in the cracks of reality, there are glitches, events that defy logic, history, and even the laws of physics? It started with a name whispered in war reports, Captain James Mercer. He vanished on the battlefield in 1944, one moment charging forward, the next, simply gone. His squad searched for days, but there was no trace. He was presumed dead. But nearly 80 years later, in a quiet hospital in London, an old man muttered something in his sleep, "I was just there. The bullets never hit me." The hospital staff thought nothing of it until he vanished again, leaving behind only his World War II uniform, still in pristine condition. Across the world, a man named Victor walked into a Tokyo airport, carrying a passport from a country that didn't exist. The security guards were baffled. The passport was real, stamped with decades of travel history from places that had never heard of his home nation. Before he could be interrogated further, he was placed in a locked hotel room for the night. The next morning, the guards checked in. He was gone. No cameras caught him leaving. The door was locked from the inside. His belongings, including that strange passport, had disappeared as if he had never been there at all. Then, there was the future phone call. A man received a warning from a stranger with an eerily familiar voice. "Don't take the highway tomorrow," the voice insisted. Confused, he ignored the warning until he saw the car crash on the news, exactly where he would have been. It wasn't until later, when he played the voicemail again, that he realized. The voice was his own. Coincidence, a mistake in history, or something much stranger? As science pushes the boundaries of reality, whispers of hidden experiments, temporal anomalies, and accidental time slips grow louder. Some believe these stories are proof that time travel is real, not science fiction, but an undeniable part of our world. Others insist it's all hoaxes and hallucinations. But if time travel is impossible, why do these stories keep happening? And more importantly, what if your next Captain James Mercer was a soldier like any other, stationed on the front lines of World War II in 1944? His squad had been moving through the dense forests of France, pushing back against enemy forces in a brutal, unrelenting battle. It was chaos. Bullets tore through the air, explosions shook the earth, and the air was thick with smoke and fear. But through it all, Mercer remained focused, leading his men through the fray. Then, in an instant, he was gone. One moment, he was charging forward alongside his comrades, rifle in hand, determination in his eyes. The next, he had simply vanished. His squad mates saw it happen a split second where he was there, then nothing. No gunfire had hit him, no explosion had taken place nearby. It was as if reality had blinked, and he had ceased to exist. His disappearance baffled his fellow soldiers. They searched for him for days, combing through the battlefield, looking for any sign: his weapon, his helmet, a body. But there was nothing. Official reports marked him as missing in action, presumed dead. For decades, Mercer was just another name on a long list of wartime disappearances. His family mourned him, his fellow soldiers eventually moved on, and history buried his story under thousands of others lost to the war. But then, something impossible happened. Nearly 80 years later, in a small hospital in London, an old man appeared under mysterious circumstances. He was found wandering the streets late at night, disoriented, still dressed in what looked like a perfectly preserved World War II uniform. Authorities were baffled. His uniform wasn't a replica, it was made of original materials from the 1940s, down to the stitching. His identification tags matched military records. He was Captain James Mercer. Doctors and government officials interrogated him, trying to make sense of his reappearance. He had no explanation. To him, only days had passed since he last stood on that battlefield in France. He described in vivid detail the moment of his disappearance. 1 second he was charging forward, the next, he was somewhere else. He recalled a strange, blinding light, a sense of weightlessness, and then darkness. The next thing he knew, he was stumbling through the streets of London. Tests were conducted. His fingerprints, his dental records, even his DNA matched the records of the long-lost soldier. There was no rational explanation for how a man who vanished in 1944 had suddenly reappeared, unchanged, in the modern world. Scientists theorized it could be a case of spontaneous time displacement, a phenomenon only ever speculated about in fringe physics theories. Others believed it was some kind of government experiment gone wrong, a soldier pulled through time by forces beyond human comprehension. Before any further answers could be obtained, Mercer vanished again. Surveillance footage captured his last known moments. He was sitting in a hospital bed, staring at his own reflection in a mirror. Then, in the blink of an eye, his bed was empty, his uniform neatly folded where he had sat. The only clue left behind was a whisper from the other patients in the ward. He kept saying the bullets never hit him. The man arrived at Haneda Airport in Tokyo just like any other traveler. He carried a well-worn leather briefcase, dressed in a professional but slightly old-fashioned suit. At the immigration checkpoint, he calmly handed over his passport to the officer. That's when things started to go wrong. The officer glanced at the document, then frowned. The passport was unlike any he had ever seen. The cover bore no recognizable emblem, and the country of origin listed inside Taured did not exist. Thinking it was a mistake, the officer called over a supervisor. Together, they examined the passport more closely. The document had every sign of authenticity, real stamps from countries like France, Spain, and Japan, all dated correctly within the past 5 years. The ink was aged properly, the holograms intact. It was real, too real to be fake, except for one glaring issue: no country named Taured had ever existed. They questioned the man, who seemed just as confused as they were. He insisted Taured was a real place, located between France and Spain. He pulled out maps from his briefcase, pointing to the exact location, except the name on the map read Andorra, not Taured. He grew frustrated, claiming his country had existed for centuries. "I've traveled here for work before," he argued, producing business documents from a company in Tokyo that also did not exist. The officials, unsure of how to proceed, detained him in a private room. They took his passport, his wallet, even his hotel reservation. Everything about him was real, but from a non-existent place. They contacted the hotel he claimed to have booked, but there was no reservation under his name. They reached out to the company he worked for, no record of it. His home country, his government, his entire history, it was as if it had all been erased. To prevent any possible espionage threat, officials placed him under surveillance in a secure hotel room for the night, with guards posted outside. They planned to investigate further in the morning. But when they checked his room at dawn, the man was gone. The guards swore no one had entered or exited. The windows were sealed, and the only door had remained locked all night. His belongings had vanished along with him. Even stranger, all records of his interrogation, the passport scans, the notes, even his name on their system had disappeared from official logs. It was as if the entire event had never happened. To this day, no explanation exists for the man from Taured. Some believe he was a time traveler, slipping between different versions of reality. Others think he was from a parallel universe, accidentally crossing into our world before being pulled back into his own. A few insist he was an elaborate hoax, but if so, it was one with no identifiable mastermind, no traces left behind, and no motive. The real question remains, if he was able to cross over, how many others have it started as an ordinary evening? Daniel, a 32-year-old accountant from Chicago, was unwinding after a long day, scrolling through his phone when it suddenly rang. The number was unknown. He hesitated but answered. "Daniel, listen to me carefully. You cannot take the highway tomorrow. No matter what happens, avoid it at all costs." The voice on the other end was eerily familiar, but he couldn't place it. There was a strange urgency, a quiet desperation in the way the words were spoken. "Who is this?" Daniel asked. There was silence for a moment before the voice responded. "I'm you, Daniel, from the future." Chills ran down his spine. A prank, a scam. He was about to hang up when the voice continued. "I know you don't believe me, so listen. Tomorrow morning, at exactly 8:42 a.m., your boss will text you to take the highway because of a roadblock on your usual route. If you do, you'll be in a horrible accident and a 18-wheeler will lose control. You won't survive. Don't take the highway, Daniel." The call cut off abruptly. No callback number. No way to trace it. Daniel sat frozen, staring at his phone. He didn't believe in time travel, let alone the idea that his future self could somehow warn him. But something about the voice had shaken him. It was too much like his own. He dismissed the call as a bizarre prank and went to bed. The next morning, he woke up and checked his phone. At exactly 8:42 a.m., his boss sent a message. "Take the highway today, construction on your usual route. Don't be late." Daniel's stomach twisted into knots. His heart pounded as he stared at the message. It was exactly what the caller had predicted. Word for word. He hesitated. If he took the highway, would he really die? It was ridiculous. He was letting a weird phone call get into his head. Still, the unease gnawed at him. At the last moment, he ignored his boss's suggestion and stuck to his usual route, despite the delays. Later that morning, the news flashed across his screen. A massive crash had occurred on the highway. A tractor-trailer had lost control due to brake failure. Several vehicles were involved. Among the victims was a black sedan exactly like his own. Daniel felt sick. If he had taken that highway, he would have been there. Terrified, he tried to call the unknown number back, but it was impossible. The call had never even registered in his phone logs. It was as if it had never happened. To this day, Daniel has no explanation. He never received another call like it, and he never found out who or what warned him. If it really was his future self, how had the call happened? Was the future already written, or had he changed it, or worse? Did someone else not get the warning? Dr. Evelyn Carter had spent her entire career studying time, specifically, the concept of temporal displacement. As a lead researcher for a highly classified government project, she had worked on advanced quantum mechanics experiments that, in theory, could manipulate the fabric of time itself. But no one, not even her, had expected what happened on the night of the final test. It was supposed to be a routine experiment. The team had built a contained energy field capable of bending time at a microscopic level. The goal was simple: slow down time within a controlled environment for mere fractions of a second. But something went wrong. As the machine powered up, a surge of energy ripped through the room, blinding the scientists. The equipment overloaded, alarms blared, and within moments, Dr. Carter was gone. The others stood frozen in shock. The surveillance footage showed her silhouette flickering like a bad signal, and then nothing. Evelyn Carter had disappeared. The team launched a full-scale investigation. No remains, no blood, no sign of where she could have gone. It was as if she had been erased from existence. But then, after exactly 72 hours, she returned. She was found in the same laboratory, collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath. Her clothes were intact, but her face was pale, her eyes wild with fear. When she saw her colleagues, she whispered, "It wasn't just time that moved differently. I did." She tried to explain what had happened, but it was nearly impossible to put into words. According to her, she had been displaced not into the past or the future, but into a fragmented existence. Time had shattered around her. She saw glimpses of herself moving through different moments, sometimes in the lab, sometimes outside of it, and sometimes in a world where she didn't even exist. The worst part, in some of those timelines, she saw her own death. She spoke of standing in the lab, watching her colleagues searching for her, unable to communicate with them. She saw them watching security footage of her disappearance from a vantage point that shouldn't have been possible. She screamed at them, waved her arms, but they never reacted. She wasn't just out of time, she was stuck between it. What terrified her most, however, was the entity she had encountered. Amidst the shattered moments of time, she was not alone. Something was there with her, watching, studying. It never spoke, never moved closer, just observed. And as suddenly as she had been displaced, she was pulled back into the present, landing on the cold floor of the lab. After her return, Dr. Carter's research was shut down. She was sworn to secrecy, her files erased, and the project buried. But she never truly left what happened behind. Some nights, she still wakes up gasping for breath, convinced that whatever had watched her is still watching. And sometimes, when she looks in the mirror, she sees a version of herself that shouldn't be there. It was supposed to be an ordinary photograph. A simple picture taken on a bright summer afternoon. But for Andrew Collins, that single image became something far more disturbing, proof that time was broken. It happened during a family trip to New York City. Andrew, an amateur photographer, had been taking pictures of landmarks, people, and street scenes as he and his wife walked through Times Square. Later that evening, while reviewing his photos, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. In the background of one of the images, standing among the busy crowd, was himself. Not someone who resembled him. Not a blurry, vague figure that could be mistaken for another person. It was him, wearing the exact same clothes he had on at that moment, holding the same camera in his hands, even standing in the same slightly slouched posture he recognized from his reflection. Confused, he zoomed in on the image. The details were unmistakable. His doppelganger appeared to be looking directly at him, as if he had posed for the photo. But that was impossible. He had never stood in that spot before. He had never seen this version of himself. At first, he tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just an eerie coincidence, someone who looked like him. Maybe a trick of the light. But then he noticed something even stranger. The timestamp on the image was from tomorrow. Andrew's stomach dropped. How could a picture taken today contain something from tomorrow? He checked the metadata of the image, even had a tech-savvy friend analyze it. The data didn't lie. The picture had been taken a full 24 hours in the future. His mind raced. If this was real, Did that mean he was destined to return to that exact spot tomorrow? Was this a glitch in reality, a ripple in time, or something else entirely? Determined to get answers, he made a decision. The next day, at the exact same time the photo had indicated, he returned to the same location in Times Square. He stood there, camera in hand, waiting. And then, he saw himself. From across the street, his future self stood there, just as he had appeared in the photograph. But something was off. The other Andrew wasn't smiling. He wasn't moving. He was just staring. A sudden wave of dizziness hit Andrew. His vision blurred. His heart pounded in his chest. And then his future self raised the camera and took a picture. The next thing he knew, he was gasping for breath, standing alone. His future self was gone. When he checked his camera, a fresh photo had appeared, one taken from across the street, at the exact moment he had seen himself. In the image, he looked terrified, as if he had seen something he wasn't meant to. Andrew never spoke about what happened that day. But sometimes, when he looks through his camera roll, he finds new photos he doesn't remember taking. And in the background, he is always there watching.